And what is the medical record number that was assigned to all of the records and blood samples of Mr. Michael Jackson?
397-5944, and there's a 4. But
okay. And the main sequence of numbers then is the 397-59-44?
That's correct.
Okay. And again, that's unique to all the specimens and the records for Michael Jackson?
Yes.
And was that medical record identifying information attached to blood samples that were collected from Mr. Jackson for subsequent analysis?
Yes, they would be.
Okay. Now, when Mr. Jackson arrived, or following his arrival at the hospital and your observations of him and his body, did you notice a condom catheter on his body?
Yes.
And what is that?
It's one type of urinary collection device in which there is a condom. At the tip of the condom, there's a hole that's connected to a tube, and that tube connects to sort of a collection bag system. It's to collect urine.
Okay. And from a medical standpoint, in a surgical room, are urinary collection devices in the form of catheters used because the patient is essentially unconscious and will need a collection device to collect the urine?
There are a number of urinary collection devices, and a catheter would be common in the OR and in other areas of the hospital.
Okay. Now, at the time that you observed that, you knew that Mr. Jackson had been coming from a home, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did that strike you as odd to see this condom catheter on the patient?
I thought it was unusual. A condom catheter would not be uncommon in someone who has problems with incontinence, but it seemed unusual for a 50-year-old male who was reportedly healthy.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, following the pronouncement of death, Dr. Cooper, did you ever consult with or request Dr. Murray to sign a death certificate?
No.
Okay. Is that something you would have done in this situation?
No.
Why not?
Mr. Jackson was my patient, and I didn't really have an explanation for why he was dead.
Okay.
And it therefore, in my mind, was a coroner's case.
When you say it was a coroner's case, you mean that it will be referenced to the coroner's office for an autopsy and investigation?
Correct.
Okay. So you never asked Dr. Murray to sign any death certificate?
No, it was not a discussion.
Okay. That conversation never even took place?
No.
These are double negatives.
Did that conversation ever take place with Conrad Murray?
That would be correct. I did not have a conversation with Dr. Murray about the death certificate, no.
And it wouldn't be his decision, it would be yours. Is that accurate?
That would be accurate.
Now, again, following pronouncement of death, was a social worker team gathered together to be available to the family and the children if necessary?
The social work team had actually been gathered even before the pronouncement. Social work was one of the team members who was notified of the code and was there at the outset, in part to help me assist contacting family, although that was apparently done through through Mr. Jackson's people. But, and I'm not sure when I became aware his children were there, but there was there was someone with the children separately, yes.
Okay. But this social worker team, was that assembled as part of the standard UCLA protocol in this type of situation?
Yes.
Okay. That was not Conrad Murray's doing. In other words, he's not the one that rendered or gathered together a social worker team, is he?
No. We would typically call a social worker when we have a code.
Okay.
And they are activated and...
As a standard protocol?
As is protocol.
Okay. Now, at some point, did you learn, or were you told that the children had been notified of their father's death following pronouncement?
Yes, I was told.
Okay. And did you then personally go to check on the children or see if there's any information you could provide?
I did go to check on the children at that time.
And did you see the children?
I did, yes.
And what were they doing?
They were crying. They were fairly hysterical, being comforted by someone who was referred to as their nurse.
Okay. And did you hear anything being said by one of the children at that time?
There were...
The objection sustained, calls for hearsay, absent further foundation, partial answers stated. Disregard.
Well, did you attempt to speak to the children at that time?
Sustained.
You described them as hysterical and crying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Walker, thank you. Cross-examination by the defense. Mr. Flanagan.
Dr. Cooper, have you reviewed any documents prior to your testimony in this case?
I've reviewed my medical chart, and I did review the preliminary hearing testimony.
Reviewed your testimony at the preliminary hearing?
Yes.
Is there anything that you would like to correct regarding your preliminary hearing testimony?
There probably are things I would clarify if I had the testimony to go through page by page now.
But nothing you'd actually correct as being wrong?
I think there may be statements I made that may have oversimplified.
But nothing absolutely wrong?
I don't believe so.
Okay. As you sit here now, what is your best estimate as to the time of death, Michael Jackson?
I don't know when his actual time of death was. I know the pronouncement I made based on the information I had at the time I was involved in the radio call.
So at 12:57, you were acquainted with all of the details from the paramedics, and you formed the opinion at that time he was dead.
Yes.
And you wouldn't authorize a call to be made if you thought there was any chance of saving an individual, would you?
No.
So at 12:57, you knew in this case nothing could be done.
Based on the information I had, I felt a pronouncement of death in the field was appropriate at that time, yes.
Okay. The only reason that anything was done after 12:57 is because Dr. Murray insisted that you don't give up. Is that correct?
I don't know if I would word it that way, because as the base physician, I could override and still pronounce. However, there was a physician on scene, and then I had potentially conflicting information. And so, yes, I did authorize and allow Dr. Murray to assume control and then bring the patient to the emergency department or the local emergency department. So, yes.
But for Dr. Murray, he doesn't even get brought to UCLA Medical Center, does he?
That would be a correct statement.
Excuse?
That would be a correct statement, yes.
And you basically felt when Michael Jackson was brought in, everything's going to be futile anyway. Is that correct?
My assessment when he arrived was that he was clinically dead. And given it had been now from the time that I had as the prior time of arrest from the code in the base station form, it was about an hour, such that the resuscitation efforts would likely be futile, yes.
But if you thought there was a chance when he was in the field You wouldn't have authorized them to call it, would you?
I'm not sure if I'm sort of saying something that seems to be conflicting, but I made a call based on the radio information that I had, which was from the paramedic report, and I did, at that time, he was clinically dead, I felt comfortable pronouncing him.
And when you wouldn't be comfortable pronouncing him dead unless you thought there was no chance. Isn't that correct?
At the time I made the pronouncement in the field, I made a decision based on the information I had, yes.
And the information that you had in the field proved out to be the same when they brought him in. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, the minute he comes in the hospital, there's no chance, is there?
In retrospect, after my evaluation and knowing everything I know now,
Right.
that would be correct.
And when you looked at him, when they brought him into the hospital and you actually got to use your own senses and eyes, you knew right then there's no chance, didn't you?
When Mr. Jackson presented to the hospital, Dr. Murray reported that he had felt a faint pulse, which conflicted the information from the paramedics. I therefore, yes, decided that it was going to be my decision to make sure that everything had been done, was done correctly, was not misrecorded, and that with effort there was no change. So, yes, I used my determination of what I saw to make a final decision.
And that confirmed the original decision that you'd made at 12:57, didn't it?
Yes.
At 12:57, based upon the information you have, would you have any idea as to the time of death?
No.
Now, you went to medical school, and then you became a resident, did an internship. Did you ever become an anesthesiologist?
No.
Do you use Propofol?
I do use Propofol in my practice in the emergency department, yes.
Is there any special certification that you have to use Propofol?
Yes.
What is that?
At UCLA, you need to have privileges, first to perform procedural sedation, as well as specifically privileges to administer Propofol.
So you're certified to use Propofol for anesthesia purposes?
No, I am certified to use Propofol in the emergency department for procedural sedation and for deep sedation of patients who are intubated. I do not perform anesthesia.
Are you certified to use Propofol for conscious sedation?
We use the term procedural sedation, and yes, I am. I do have privileges to perform procedural sedation using Propofol at UCLA.
Have you ever practiced in a medical office?
No.
I take it you've probably never made house calls either.
No, I am an emergency medicine physician. I work in the emergency department.
And so whenever you're practicing medicine, you're always in the confines of a medical room or a hospital setting.
Of a hospital emergency department, that would be correct.
You use the term procedural sedation. Does that differ from the term conscious sedation?
Conscious sedation is sort of an oxymoron, right? You're not conscious and potentially sort of very sedated and unconscious. So we use the term procedural sedation for the reasons that we would be, using these medications.
Well, in conscious sedation, when you sedate the individual, the individual's capable of being aroused, isn't he?
Sedation is a continuum from being completely alert to being comatose.
So you're not even familiar with the term conscious sedation?
Objection to state the testimony.
The objection sustained in view of the earlier answers.
Okay. Is there a difference in being certified for conscious sedation versus certified for anesthesia in the use of Propofol?
So in terms, there is a difference in having privileges to perform procedural sedation